Hi guys, this week's Laser Talk is a Francis Ford Coppola film that I had never even heard of before, which surprised me because it apparently did fairly well and was fairly well received. So not that I've seen every Francis Ford Coppola film, but I was surprised I never even heard of Peggy Sue Got Married. Again, surprised I never even heard of this release before. And it was a good film. I wasn't quite as enamored with it as a lot of the reviews back then would have been. I always go back after I watch them and after I kind of gather my thoughts and right before I film look and see like, well, how was this film received back in the day? Just out of curiosity compared to what my perspective was. Kathleen Turner, who plays Peggy Sue, did a very good job. There's nothing wrong really with one exception with the casting. Everyone looks and plays the parts very well. It's actually one of the best parts. A good movie, probably just not quite up my alley. It stars Kathleen Turner as Peggy Sue, who is going to her 25th high school reunion in 1985, and her life is kind of falling apart. She's remembering some of the mistakes she's made in the past and maybe considering a different path her life could have taken, something everyone thinks of and at some point in their life thinking about like, well, if I had a chance to go back in time. And for some reason high school tends to be that time that a lot of people kind of focus on right before, I guess, as you're making that turn from being a child into making these life-changing decisions and starting a pathway through adulthood. And I think that's why that's the time it's focused on. I think that's what really is great about this movie as far as how it can touch everyone and relate to everyone, even if you aren't into and can't connect with the time frames this takes place in, which would be the 1960 and then 1985. A little bit of a time travel story, I'll explain. Even if you can't relate to those time periods, I think everyone after a certain age can relate to this idea and this wondering and this pondering of different pathways you could have taken in life, different, loves that were lost, and what would happen if I had been with that person instead? Would things be different now? What if I'd done this different school or career choice? Totally different perspectives on life, and that's what this film does really well. It really does that element incredibly well and has a good balance between looking at those elements in a very serious tone and really bring up questions that everyone has, but keeping it lighthearted enough and adding enough comedy to make it an enjoyable picture and not a slog to get through, and not really something that's trying to pound home a message. Just makes you think about something that I think everyone as a human being eventually questions. Peggy Sue is at a point now where her marriage is kind of falling apart. She's at the edge of divorce, and that's really bringing those questions to the forefront, and this event also being, in a way, reliving a bit and having all those past choices and past possibilities being thrown right in your face as you go back to the old high school and confronted with all these people, some you haven't seen in years, and catch up with. And she even dresses the part like she wore a dress that was from her prom in the 60s, and it sets up a pretty interesting element that I'm glad they did it the way they did it. She ends up passing out at this reunion and going back in time to her senior year of high school, and I'm very glad they didn't put a major focus on the time travel aspect. It's something that's brought up here and there, and she has to get used to like, oh my gosh, am I dead? Am I dreaming? Did I really time travel? Whatever. It's brought up, but it's not the focus. They could have done something a little more Back to the Futurist, sort of Back to the Future type, like play on the time travel element, but it really takes a back seat for like the vast majority of the film, and it's more about reliving those moments and making decisions and realizing that maybe the grass isn't always greener, or things that maybe you could have done better, and really putting things into perspective and really giving a great example for, I think, everyone who has those questions of, well, what would some of those answers be? It really makes you think about your own life, and if this happened to you, how would things actually turn out? It does a really good job in that respect, and a good cast with one exception that I think is a little more personal thing here, but overall that is done very, very well. It's a great movie in that respect. It's weird because one of my favorite decades is the 60s. My absolute favorite decade by far is the 80s. But for some reason, this didn't quite capture me quite as much as I thought it would. Again, a film that brought up some really great questions and made me think, even after I watched the film, sit and just kind of think about my own perspective of what would happen if I did that. And in that way, it was a good film. And again, great acting and directing and things. But overall, it just wasn't one that truly captured me. It was one that, I watched it and it brought up good questions and it was interesting and thought-provoking, but I'm not sure if I would maybe watch it one more time in the future. It's just not one that I think I would revisit a lot. It's a one-time good experience, but not one I think I'd re-experience, if that makes any sense. The one I mentioned a couple times is I really don't like Nicolas Cage. in anything. I honestly don't understand how he has a career. It drives me crazy. They're just a handful of popular actors and actresses, and just like a short list of people that like I just don't get how people like them. There are some that, of course, I like, that I can understand why some people don't like them, and some that I don't enjoy, but I can see the appeal for some people in certain films that they like. But then there are just a couple of actors that I don't get how anyone likes them. And to me, his portrayal of Peggy Sue's husband and then going back in time boyfriend, I really wish someone else was in that role, because I think that's one of the things that kind of took me out of it a little bit. I really don't like him, and I didn't like him in this. And I think the difference between his acting in this movie compared to everyone else, especially Kathleen Turner, feels so real and alive, and you believe them. The believability is what makes or breaks this movie, because of the time travel element, and especially because you have these people that you see, people like even Jim Carrey, who does a pretty good job. It's the people that you see as their high school self, and then you see them 25 years later, and being able to play that believably and be characters that you can relate to make you ask again those questions, because that's sort of the heart of this movie, is making you think about yourself in this story, in this possibility, and because it's something everyone thinks about, and that is broken if the characters aren't believable. And to me, overall, I think Nicolas Cage came off as a little cartoony to me. Like, overall, he didn't feel believable. He felt almost like a caricature of the person he was playing. He felt like he was given this persona of this individual that she would have been like kind of like the popular kid back in 1960, and really trying to fit in that 60s vibe. And he feels like someone who is at like a Halloween party type thing, playing that someone who's a 1960s high schooler. He feels that, and it feels goofy, and it doesn't click. And every time there's a scene with him, which are usually pretty important scenes in this film, it kind of takes me out a little bit, and I don't quite believe it as much. And I think again, it's partially, I think, his acting as a whole in this movie, versus also adding my own little element in there, adding my own distaste for his acting style. So overall, I think that's one thing that took me out of it a little bit. So again, a very good movie that I think is one that I would recommend everyone see at least once, just because it has a well done story on something that I think is just part of the human experience, and I think that makes it great in that way and how it handles it. But at the same time, it was only enjoyable to that respect, not one that I feel like I would enjoy many multiple viewings of. The other thing too is, if you are looking for this film and you are a LaserDisc collector, because I know a lot of people that watch these videos of mine either are LaserDisc people or are interested in the format, maybe in the future. There are two versions of this released in the US, and I think it was also released on LaserDisc and maybe VHD, I think, in Japan. But as far as the US releases, there are two. This is the CBS Fox version. They're both pan and scan, sadly, both of them. There's also a remastered version that I do not have, but I'd suggest going for that one. This one is talking about the disc itself. Again, it was a pan and scan. It's nothing about it. It's truly spectacular. Visually, it looks very VHS. Everything looks a little washed out, not very sharp. Everything looks a little grainy. It's a pretty poor picture quality. I mean, out of the discs that I've watched so far, this would probably be towards the bottom as far as overall quality, so not a great release. And again, I don't know how much better the remastered edition is. I forget, maybe it's Columbia TriStar, I think maybe is that release. But if you are going to get this movie and you do want to look for it on LaserDisc, I would check out that. If you can find it, the remastered edition, definitely. Even though I don't know how much improved it is, it's got to be improved over this, because not a great quality. And again, a film that made me think about things, but didn't really connect with me as far as something that I would enjoy watching again and again. If you've seen this movie, let me know what you think about it, and see if maybe you have a totally different take on it. It is something that is a favorite of yours. So Peggy Sue Got Married, a movie that I think is deserving of its accolades, but not one. I feel like the reason why I've not heard about it before is that it just doesn't have that classic appeal, that movie that kind of everyone knows is always played, crosses the generations. I think its message crosses the generations, but I think it's, as a movie, it's kind of a once and done type deal, something that's good to watch once for what it makes you think about, but not great for repeat viewings.